You think absolute power is about grand armies and political schemes? The real truth is much weirder. When you can have anything in the world, your hobbies get strange. Really strange. We're about to show you the bizarre, secret pastimes of history's most powerful rulers, from a king who was a professional thief to an emperor whose dinner parties had a body count. This is what they did when no one was watching. 1. While most monarchs collect fine art or rare jewels, King Farouk of Egypt had a more hands-on approach to acquisition. He was a pathological kleptomaniac. This wasn't a case of just forgetting to return a borrowed pen. Farooq operated at a world-class level, viewing every social gathering as a shopping spree where everything was free. He would pilfer from anyone, from his own servants to visiting heads of state. His most audacious feat was stealing a priceless pocket watch directly from Winston Churchill during a crucial diplomatic meeting. Imagine the scene. Churchill is trying to discuss geopolitics while the King of Egypt is subtly liberating his timepiece. The British Prime Minister, not one to be trifled with, eventually noticed and had to send an aide to awkwardly demand it back. This hobby went beyond a simple quirk. It was an international liability. 2. If you ever found yourself in the court of Peter the Great of Russia, your #1 rule would be to never, ever complain about a toothache. The formidable Tsar had a maniacal passion for dentistry, a field in which he had absolutely no formal training but an abundance of terrifying enthusiasm. He carried a large, intimidating pouch of dental tools wherever he went, always on the lookout for his next victim. He particularly loved the challenge of extracting perfectly healthy teeth, often having to pin down his struggling courtiers himself. He even kept all the teeth he pulled as a gruesome collection of trophies. While he was busy modernizing Russia's army and building a new capital, he was also pursuing his side hustle as the royal family's worst nightmare, one horrifying amateur extraction at a time. 3. Receiving an invitation to a banquet with Roman Emperor Elagabalus was a high-stakes gamble. As a teenager with unlimited power and zero impulse control, his idea of a good time was, frankly, lethal. One of his signature party tricks involved a false ceiling that would release a literal avalanche of flower petals onto his unsuspecting guests. What sounds poetic was actually a method of fragrant assassination, as the sheer weight and volume would often suffocate diners to death. If you somehow survived the floral apocalypse, the evening's entertainment might also include releasing tame lions and bears into the dining hall. Sure, they were supposedly declawed, but I guarantee that knowledge doesn't help much when a bear is charging your dinner table. An evening with Elagabalus was less a party and more a beautifully decorated death trap. 4. As the sprawling Austrian Empire navigated wars, rebellions, and intricate political crises, its official leader, Emperor Ferdinand I, remained singularly focused on the one thing that truly mattered. Suffering from a severe mental disability, Ferdinand's role was purely ceremonial, which allowed him to dedicate his full attention to his life's passion. Each day, he would faithfully update his personal diary, the official record of his reign from his perspective. And every single day, he penned the same profound entry: "I am the emperor, and I want dumplings." That's it. No musings on statecraft, no grand strategies. Just a relentless daily quest for dumplings. In a world of political double-talk, you have to respect the sheer, unyielding honesty of a man who knew exactly what he wanted from life. 5. For several hours every single day, the Roman Emperor Domitian would sequester himself in his private chambers, demanding absolute solitude. His staff and guards could only speculate on the vital imperial business being conducted behind those closed doors. Was he poring over maps, planning his next military campaign? Or perhaps writing philosophy that would echo through the ages? The reality was far stranger and infinitely creepier. Domitian was spending his alone time methodically hunting and killing flies. He would catch them with uncanny skill and then, with the cold precision of a surgeon, impale them on a sharp writing stylus. This wasn't just a way to pass the time. It was a disturbing daily ritual that offered a terrifying glimpse into the mind of a tyrant, a man obsessed with exerting absolute, fatal power, even over the smallest of creatures. 6. King Christian VII of Denmark perfectly embodied the idea of work hard, play hard, except his version of playing hard involved becoming a public menace. Utterly bored by the strictures of royal life and plagued by mental illness, his favorite hobby was a form of extreme escapism. At night, he would shed his royal attire for the rags of a commoner, team up with his favorite courtesan and his dog, and descend upon the taverns of Copenhagen. His goal? To get blackout drunk and start massive bar fights. He reveled in the chaos, smashing furniture and brawling with sailors, experiencing a kind of freedom he could never find in the palace. It must have created the most awkward situation imaginable for the City Watch, who had the unenviable task of breaking up a riot started by their own sovereign. 7. Most kings are remembered for their wars or their laws. King Adolf Frederick of Sweden is remembered for his last meal, which was less a meal and more a culinary suicide mission. His one true hobby was gluttony, and he pursued it with the dedication of an Olympic athlete. For his final performance, he consumed a staggering feast of lobster, caviar, sauerkraut, smoked herring, and an entire bottle of champagne. But that was merely the opening act. For the main event, he devoured an incredible 14 servings of his favorite dessert, a rich, cream-filled bun soaked in hot milk called semla. Shortly thereafter, his digestive system officially resigned from duty, and the king died. He wasn't overthrown or assassinated, he was defeated by a pastry, achieving a glorious, sugar-fueled death. 8. Queen Victoria is the very image of stern, buttoned-up 19th-century morality. Her public persona was one of unshakable dignity and perpetual mourning for her beloved husband, Albert. In private, however, she harbored a hobby that was considerably more peculiar. She was an avid collector, but her collection wasn't of art or stamps. It was of her own children's baby teeth. And she didn't just keep them in a box. In a move that was both deeply sentimental and slightly unnerving, she had these tiny teeth set into elaborate pieces of jewelry. She owned brooches, earrings, and bracelets studded with the pearly whites of the future rulers of the British Empire. It's a striking image, the unsmiling Empress of India, addressing Parliament while wearing a brooch accented by a princely molar. 9. Some people enjoy a good practical joke, but King Victor Emmanuel II of Italy, the first king of a unified Italy, elevated the prank to an art form, albeit a rather cruel and childish one. He had a relentless need to embarrass his own ministers and court officials. One of his signature moves was to secretly tie a fox's tail to the coattails of a serious politician right before a crucial meeting, ensuring maximum humiliation. He also found it hilarious to hide live frogs in the beds of his overnight guests, or swap out the contents of a diplomat's snuff box with pepper, just to watch them erupt in a sneezing fit. For a man tasked with forging a new nation, he dedicated an astonishing amount of energy to thinking up new ways to make the most powerful people around him look like complete fools. 10. After spending his youth in the notoriously coarse environment of the Royal Navy, William IV brought a rather colorful piece of the sailor's life with him to the British throne, a spectacular talent for swearing. While other kings had hobbies like painting or hunting, William's unique pastime was creatively inserting the foulest, most shocking nautical curses into the most inappropriate situations possible. Formal state dinners, meetings with bishops, delicate diplomatic negotiations. No occasion was too sacred. He would unleash torrents of profanity that would make a pirate blush, much to the horror of his prim and proper court. He wasn't just a king who occasionally swore. He was a connoisseur of cursing, treating it as his personal way of keeping the stuffy atmosphere of the palace a little more real. 11. While other rulers built fortresses for defense or palaces for governance, King Ludwig II of Bavaria had a much more whimsical construction project in mind. His obsession was building impossibly beautiful, fairy tale castles that served absolutely no practical purpose. He drained the royal treasury to create architectural fantasies like Neuschwanstein, the very castle that would later inspire Disney. But here's the truly bizarre part. He almost never lived in them. He was a recluse who preferred to experience his creations alone, often taking solitary midnight sleigh rides through the mountains, or being rowed across a lake in a golden swan-shaped boat in his own private grotto. His hobby wasn't just architecture, it was constructing a lonely, real-life fantasy world just for himself. 12. Catherine the Great of Russia was a brilliant ruler, a patron of the arts, and a formidable political force. She was also, by all accounts, a truly terrible playwright. Convinced she possessed a hidden literary genius, she dedicated countless hours to writing incredibly dull, preachy, and formulaic plays. And because she was Catherine the Great, she didn't just write them for her desk drawer. Her hobby included forcing the entire Russian court to sit through agonizingly long performances of her work. The nobles had no choice but to attend, feign intense interest, and then erupt into thunderous, mandatory applause at the end. It was the ultimate captive audience, a theatrical ordeal where the price of a bad review could be a one-way trip to Siberia. 13. King Charles II of England, known as the Merry Monarch, had a peculiar obsession that must have made his chambers the noisiest place in London. He was utterly fascinated by clocks and mechanical devices. His bedrooms and private apartments were filled with hundreds of them, from grand long-case clocks to intricate little mantel clocks. His peculiar hobby was spending an enormous amount of his time trying to get them all to chime in perfect, harmonious synchronization. It was an impossible, maddening task that he pursued with religious fervor. Imagine trying to get a moment of peace, only to be surrounded by an army of ticking, whirring machines, all leading up to a deafening, slightly out-of-sync chorus of chimes every hour. It was a personal symphony of engineered chaos. 14. Paranoia is a lonely feeling, but for King Eric XIV of Sweden, it became an all-consuming, interactive hobby. He was utterly convinced that his enemies had planted secret doppelgangers, exact lookalikes of him, throughout the kingdom to spy on him and eventually replace him. So, he spent his days compiling detailed, ever-growing lists of men he suspected of being his secret twins. This wasn't just a passive fear. He would actively try to hunt these poor, unsuspecting men down, interrogating anyone who bore even a passing resemblance to him. His court lived in constant fear of his erratic behavior, knowing that looking a little too much like the king could earn you a place on a royal hit list, born from pure paranoid fantasy. 15. Queen Marie Antoinette, living in the extravagant bubble of Versailles, had a rather unique solution for wanting to escape the pressures of court life. She decided to play dress-up as a poor person. She ordered the construction of a complete idealized peasant village in the palace gardens, known as the Hameau de la Reine. It was a rustic fantasy land, complete with a farmhouse, a dairy, and a watermill, all spotlessly clean and charmingly fake. Here, she and her ladies-in-waiting would put on simple dresses, carry porcelain buckets, and pretend to be milkmaids and shepherdesses, connecting with nature by milking perfectly groomed cows that had been washed and perfumed by servants beforehand. It was the ultimate display of being out of touch, a hobby that perfectly symbolized the disconnect between the monarchy and the starving French population. 16. While the nobles of his court worried about politics and power, King Louis XIV of France was more concerned with their hairlines. He had a deep and abiding passion for barbering and hairdressing. This wasn't a distant appreciation. He was a hands-on artist. The king personally owned a full set of professional razors, scissors, and combs, and he insisted on personally cutting, styling, and shaving his courtiers. Imagine the pressure, sitting in a chair, your king holding a sharp razor to your throat, and having to pretend you absolutely love the ridiculous new hairstyle he's just given you. It gave a whole new meaning to the term royal command, where refusing a haircut could have been seen as an act of treason. 17. Most people honor their ancestors by looking at portraits or telling stories. King Charles II of Spain, the final Habsburg ruler, had a much more direct and ghoulish hobby. He was morbidly obsessed with his deceased relatives, to the point where he regularly ordered their coffins to be opened for his private viewing. He would descend into the royal crypt and spend hours just gazing at the decaying remains of his predecessors, including his own mother. For him, this wasn't a horrifying ordeal. It was a strange form of family reunion. Given that Charles himself was the product of generations of incest and suffered from numerous physical and mental ailments, this bizarre fixation on the dead seems like a deeply unsettling yet somehow fitting pastime for the tragic end of a royal dynasty. 18. King George IV of the United Kingdom had a passion for military history, but he wasn't content with just reading books. He needed to see the action unfold. And if he couldn't have the real thing, he would create the next best thing, regardless of cost. His ultimate hobby was commissioning a gigantic, incredibly detailed diorama of the Battle of Waterloo. This wasn't some small tabletop model. It was a massive, room-sized installation featuring tens of thousands of individually crafted and painted lead soldiers. He spent a royal fortune on it, obsessing over the accuracy of every uniform, the placement of every cannon, and the topography of the battlefield. While his country dealt with post-war realities, the king was in his palace playing the world's most expensive game of toy soldiers. 19. Some royals have eccentric hobbies, and then there's Prince Sado of Joseon, Korea, whose pastime was just deeply, deeply disturbing. The troubled crown prince had a frightening fascination with death, which manifested in a truly bizarre daily ritual. He would frequently dress himself in the ceremonial clothes intended for a corpse and then wander the palace grounds. His servants and courtiers would be going about their business, only to turn a corner and be confronted by the heir to the throne shuffling towards them like a ghost, dressed for his own funeral. This hobby was one of many alarming signs of his severe mental instability, which eventually led his own father, the king, to lock him in a rice chest until he died. It's a grim reminder that a weird hobby can sometimes be a terrifying cry for help. 20. There's a time for leisure, and there's a time for facing an existential threat to your kingdom. King Thibaw of Burma, the country's last monarch, seemed to have trouble telling the difference. As the formidable British Empire's forces were literally marching on his capital city of Mandalay, poised to conquer his kingdom and end his reign, the young king was engrossed in his favorite hobby, competitive kite flying. While his generals were frantically trying to organize a defense, King Thibaw was on the palace grounds, staging elaborate kite battles with his courtiers. It's an almost surreal image of denial, a monarch so detached from reality that his primary concern during a foreign invasion was whose kite could fly the highest. Unsurprisingly, his reign did not last much longer. 21. For Empress Elizabeth of Austria, affectionately known as Sisi, her hobby wasn't something she did, it was something she was. Her own body and beauty were her all-consuming lifelong project. The daily routine to maintain her famous floor-length hair alone took a staggering 3 hours. She had a personal gymnasium installed in the palace, a shocking novelty for a 19th-century woman, where she would spend hours on rings and bars. To maintain her legendary 19-inch waist, she lived on a diet that was often nothing more than beef broth and the occasional orange. Her obsession was so extreme that she would have her waist measured multiple times a day. Being beautiful wasn't just a goal for Sisi, it was a full-time, agonizing, and ultimately isolating job. 22. King Henry IV of France was a formidable warrior and a savvy politician, known for his pragmatism and charm. But behind closed doors, he had a hobby that was utterly at odds with his powerful image. Even in his mature years, his favorite pastime was to get down on his hands and knees and pretend to be a horse for his children. He would crawl and whinny around the royal apartments, giving his delighted kids rides on his back. He was so committed to this game that he was once famously discovered mid-gallop by a visiting foreign ambassador. Without missing a beat or showing the slightest embarrassment, the king simply looked up and asked, "Monsieur Ambassador, have you any children?" When the diplomat said yes, Henry replied, "Good, then I shall finish my tour of the room." 23. Most kings want a powerful army, but King Frederick William III of Prussia took that desire to a bizarrely literal and obsessive level. He wasn't interested in tactics or strategy as much as he was in aesthetics. Specifically, the aesthetics of height. His great hobby and obsession was the creation of a special regiment of giant soldiers, known as the Potsdam Giants. He would go to any lengths to recruit men over 6 feet tall, which was exceptionally rare at the time. He bought them, he traded for them, and when that wasn't enough, he simply kidnapped them from other countries. He even tried to force tall men and women to breed, hoping to create a new generation of giants. The irony? He was so fond of his tall soldiers that he never once risked them in battle. 24. Emperor Nero believed he was a gift to the world, not as a ruler, but as a supremely talented artist. His greatest passion was music and acting, and he was thoroughly convinced he was the greatest singer, lyre player, and tragedian of his generation. His hobby involved staging epic, multi-hour concerts where he was the only star. He would compel thousands of Roman citizens to attend these performances, and once inside the amphitheater, no one was allowed to leave, for any reason. The doors were locked, and the audience was his prisoner until he decided the show was over. The historian Suetonius reports that people became so desperate they would feign death to be carried out, or even try to scale the massive walls of the theater to escape another one of the emperor's agonizingly long lyre solos. 25. As France spiraled into bankruptcy and revolutionary fervor, with his people starving and his political authority crumbling, King Louis XVI had a pressing hobby to attend to: locksmithing. While the fate of his kingdom hung in the balance, the king would retreat to his private workshop in the attic of Versailles for hours on end. He was a genuinely skilled craftsman, fascinated by the intricate mechanics of locks and keys. He would meticulously design and forge complex devices, finding immense satisfaction in the precise, controllable world of metalworking. It was the ultimate metaphor for his reign. A well-intentioned but clueless monarch, literally locking himself away from the explosive problems of his country to tinker with puzzles he could actually solve. While France needed a leader, it had a very dedicated part-time blacksmith. 26. In his later years, Ivan the Terrible, the notoriously brutal Tsar of Russia, developed a hobby that was a truly schizophrenic blend of extreme piety and monstrous cruelty. He established a bizarre, quasi-monastic order within the Kremlin called the Oprichnina. He and his loyal band of thugs would dress in black monk's robes, and their days would begin with hours of intense prostrating prayer services, with Ivan himself acting as the abbot, fervently ringing the church bells. But once prayers were over, the monks would get down to their real business. They would ride out on black horses to terrorize, torture, and execute anyone the Tsar deemed an enemy. This daily whiplash between devout worship and sadistic violence was Ivan's unique pastime, turning the Russian court into a terrifying monastery of death. 27. After abdicating the British throne for the woman he loved, the former King Edward VIII, now the Duke of Windsor, needed a new hobby to fill his days in exile. He chose the bagpipes. This in itself isn't too strange, but the Duke's approach was a form of auditory terrorism for everyone around him. He wasn't just a casual player. He made it a daily, non-negotiable ritual, often marching around his garden for an hour while playing. According to all who heard him, including his long-suffering wife Wallis Simpson, he was absolutely terrible. The loud, discordant wailing became the bane of their neighbor's existence and a source of deep marital friction. For a man who gave up an empire for a quiet life, he seemed determined to make that life as noisy and unpleasant as possible. 28. Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II was an avid collector, but his interests were far more peculiar than fine art or ancient artifacts. His real passion was collecting people. He turned his court in Prague into a living cabinet of curiosities, actively seeking out and employing individuals with unusual physical attributes. His palace was home to a veritable menagerie of giants, dwarves, and people with various genetic anomalies. He wasn't necessarily cruel to them. Rather, he was endlessly fascinated, treating them as human curios to be studied and observed. His most famous courtier was a giant named Lange Stefan. For Rudolph II, these people weren't just subjects. They were the prized, living exhibits in his bizarre and deeply unsettling royal collection. 29. While some rulers built armies, Joachim II or Hector, the Elector of Brandenburg, had a more ambitious plan to secure his state's future. He was going to make his own gold. He became utterly consumed by the pseudoscience of alchemy, believing he was on the cusp of discovering the philosopher's stone, which could turn base metals into precious ones. His court became a haven for every charlatan and self-proclaimed alchemist in Europe, and he squandered the entire state treasury funding their increasingly bizarre and fruitless experiments. He wasn't just a patron, he was an active participant, spending countless hours in his laboratory, personally trying to brew up a fortune. In the end, his hobby didn't produce a single ounce of gold, but it did succeed in completely bankrupting his entire country. 30. King Charles IX of France had a hobby that was loud, sweaty, and about as far from the refined elegance of the royal court as you could get. He was a passionate blacksmith. He had a full-scale, professional-grade forge installed right inside the Louvre Palace, where he would spend hours on end, stripped down and covered in soot, hammering away at red-hot metal. He ignored pressing matters of state, religious wars, and political intrigue to perfect his craft, forging intricate swords, horseshoes, and elaborate metalwork. While his mother, Catherine de' Medici, was arguably the true power behind the throne, the king himself was often busy with what he considered the more important and satisfying work of bending steel to his will, one deafening hammer, blow at a time. 31. Most people collect things they can put on a shelf, but King Sobhuza II of Swaziland had a hobby that was far more interactive and, well, populous. His great passion was collecting wives. Over his staggering 82-year reign, he officially married more than 70 women, turning the royal household into a sprawling, complex community. This hobby naturally came with a significant byproduct: children. He fathered over 210 of them, creating a royal lineage of truly epic proportions. For Sobhuza, marriage wasn't just a political tool or a personal commitment. It was a form of large-scale collection, a way of building a nation quite literally from his own family. It certainly made for some very, very crowded holiday gatherings at the palace. 32. King Ferdinand VII of Spain was known to his people as a cruel, reactionary, and absolutist monarch who ruthlessly crushed any hint of liberal reform. It's therefore incredibly jarring to learn about his favorite private hobby. He was an expert and delicate embroiderer. While publicly projecting an image of iron-fisted masculinity, Ferdinand would spend countless quiet hours meticulously stitching intricate designs with a needle and thread. He was exceptionally skilled, creating beautiful, ornate vestments for priests and lavishly decorated gowns for statues of the Virgin Mary. It's a baffling contradiction. A brutal tyrant who found his greatest personal solace in one of the most gentle and precise crafts imaginable, creating objects of delicate beauty while his country lived in fear of his cruelty. 33. The Mughal Emperor. Jahangir had a deep fascination with the natural world, but his approach was far more intense than simply enjoying a walk in the woods. He was an obsessive amateur zoologist and a dedicated opium addict, and his two hobbies often intertwined. He maintained a vast menagerie of exotic animals, but he wasn't content to just observe them. He would conduct detailed dissections, commission hyper-realistic paintings of their anatomy, and take extensive scientific notes on their behavior, often while completely high. His court artists were commanded to capture every detail, from the patterns on a turkey's waddle to the stripes of a zebra he'd received as a gift. It was a strange and potent cocktail of scientific curiosity and narcotic haze, resulting in some of the most beautiful and precise wildlife art in history. So it seems when you mix ultimate power with unlimited free time, you get everything from amateur dentistry to professional hooliganism. But history is filled with eccentric rulers, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. We've shown you our 33, but who is the one ruler with an absurdly weird hobby that we unforgivably missed? I want to see the most obscure and bizarre examples you can dig up in the comments. If you enjoyed this dive into royal madness, hit like and subscribe for more.